Welcome back to Betrayal and Revenge Stories. I'm your friend Z, and today I'm here with an interesting story about a woman who cheated on her husband, got pregnant, had an abortion, and now regrets all those actions after all your comments and messages made her realize. Let's get into the story. I was 20 when I met my husband. We met when we were both traveling around Europe. I was just finishing my trip. He was just starting his. We met and slept together the same day and spent my last few days together. For anyone saying this was a red flag for him any more than it was for me, your sexism is showing. After he went home, we struck up communication again and had a long-distance relationship that lasted a year. During this time, we talked about previous relationships and why they failed. I told him my ex dumped me for kissing another girl, and at the time, I didn't think it was a big deal. But I had since realized that cheating is cheating and it was wrong of me to do it. He moved to where I was, as his work is freelance and he can do it from anywhere, and I had spent the last year settling into a job I really liked. This was his suggestion. He makes more money than me and wanted to buy a house right away. I told him I would rather wait until we were married. We had discussed marriage at length and it's what we both wanted. And we could buy one together, but he said he didn't want to throw money away on rent, and when we got married and I signed a prenup, he would put my name on the mortgage. The suggestion of a prenup was offensive, as he knew my family are well off, and I never cared about money, but I agreed. I also wanted to keep my own last name if we got married, and he said he wouldn't marry me if I didn't take his last name. This I also agreed to. He said fair is fair, and if I wanted to live and raise kids near my family and not his, and I be the one to stay home while he worked when we had kids, which I wanted, then I had to make compromises too. I didn't think these were fair compromises, but I agreed. He bought the house against my wishes and then we got married, and to his credit, he put my name on the mortgage the following week. But this all left a bitter taste in my mouth. For the most part, things were great. I had a good social life and was outgoing. He was more of a stay-at-home type. I had lots of friends. He was focused on work. We were different, but we made it work. One of the men I worked with expressed an interest, even knowing I was married, and I told him no. I told my husband this and he asked me to stop spending time with him outside work. I told him no, as I had already shot the other man down. This was a mistake on my part and I admit it. When things were good, they were great. But I also had resentments about the decisions I'd been forced to make and felt less like an equal partner in the marriage by the day. He bought a dog without my consent. When we were long distance, I told him I wanted a dog, but that I wanted to wait until we had kids so they could bond together. He claims I never mentioned this last part. He claimed it was a surprise for me and that I was ungrateful for kicking up a fuss, so the dog stayed. I've never been great at communicating and prefer my own space when things go bad. So instead of talking about these issues, I let them fester and spent more time with my friends, including the guy from work. My husband was overprotective and asked me to check in with him if I was out late and asked me not to stay out at night, even when I was staying at a female friend's house. I am not the apron and dishwashing type of woman. I have always valued my freedom. These arguments drove a wedge between us, and I made a terrible decision. I was drunk and slept with the guy from the office. I came home after and slept on the couch and cried all night. My husband came down the next morning and attacked me for not coming home at a reasonable time. Said I was a mess because I slept in the clothes I went out in and that I looked like a hooker. The other man, Greg, never said things like this to me. He enjoyed being social and dancing and all the other things my husband didn't. I was young and stupid and decided to keep seeing him. He was kind and decent, and the more time I spent with him, the more I wished I met him first. I found out I was pregnant. I didn't know who the baby was, and I was racked with guilt. I told Greg the day I found out, and he told me to get an abortion, that he didn't want to get caught up in the middle of raising a kid with a married woman. This was the moment when the affair ended. I told my husband a week later. He didn't have to pry the truth out of me like he said in his post. A couple of months in, he saw me upset and I told him. He flew home without telling me and ignored my calls. I realized then that I made a terrible mistake and decided to recommit to my marriage. I told him I would get an abortion if the child wasn't his. He told me to go fuck myself and hung up. Eventually, he came home and we found out the baby wasn't his. So as we agreed, I put on the appointment for the abortion. When we did the paternity test, the doctor asked me if I wanted to know the sex. My husband answered for me and said it doesn't matter, and we left. I went back without him and found out it wasn't an IT, it was a she. My daughter. Over the course of the week, I had thoughts of being a mother. I had always wanted to raise kids, and in my fantasies during this week, I didn't think about the other man. This was my husband's baby. I pictured the three of us together as a family. It wasn't ideal, but there was no good reason I could think of that we couldn't make the best of a bad situation. I planned to tell him who the father really was. I panicked and told him it was a one-time thing while I was away for the weekend, and I would quit my job. It wasn't perfect, but if he loved me, we could make it work. Life throws tests at us, and when I took my marriage vows, I realized this and hoped he would too. The day of the appointment, I begged him not to make me choose. I begged him to do one thing for me. Not to commit to a lifetime of it. Not even to love the baby. Just to do one thing for me. I begged him to try. I asked him to give it a chance. He told me he was filing for divorce. I need to make something clear. Yes, I made mistakes, but I love my husband. He was the great love of my life and still is. He told me he wouldn't even try to make it work, and if I didn't have the operation, he would leave me and file for divorce that day. I asked him to let me think about it, and he said no to that too. I was torn between two horrible choices, and I chose one. I had the abortion. I was never going to raise a baby alone. If he wasn't with me on this, I wasn't going through with it, and he made it clear he wasn't with me. The few weeks after the operation, I was in more pain than I had ever been in my life. During this time, I stayed with my parents because we couldn't be around each other. I blamed him for making me choose. He still hated me for the cheating, and even told me he hated me for wanting to keep the baby and for asking him to be around for us. But I didn't want it to be in vain, so I moved back home and tried to make it work. I kept my feelings bottled up because I didn't want to remind him of what I had done. I was on medical leave for 3 months and none of my friends knew. As far as they knew, Sam, my husband, and I had miscarried, as did my parents. I had nobody to talk to. I asked Greg to come over and we talked. I cried and he cried with me. It felt good to be heard and not have to wear a mask. These visits happened another half a dozen times, and it's important to know nothing sexual happened. The affair was over. I was leaning on a friend, the only friend who knew what I was going through. You know the rest. He came home, found out Greg was the father. We moved away and things got better. These were great years and I loved him with my whole heart. I never forgot what happened, but we talked about having our own children. I was happy, and I had him to thank for that. When I found out I couldn't have children anymore, I tried to tell him, but I remembered the way he looked at me years ago when he found out. The names he called me. I thought of how much he loved me and I didn't want to ruin that by telling him I could never give him children because of my betrayal. I reached out to Greg. I found out he had moved away from our hometown too and was only a few hours' drive away. He is married now, but I wasn't looking to start anything back up. Only to talk. He told me I should tell Sam. I couldn't. We agreed to meet and I took the day off work. We met halfway and we slept together. We agreed it would be a one-time thing and both went back to our partners. To anyone who wants to call me a whore, I know it was wrong, but life isn't black and white. I don't regret anything. I love them both. And for better or worse, they will both always be a part of what makes me who I am today. I got drunk and told Sam everything. I was hurt and cruel to him and told him I wasn't sorry I met up with Greg. He called me a whore again and told me he was glad I gave up the baby. I slapped him, he slapped me back. I don't resent him at all for hitting me. He had never lifted a hand to me before and I said awful things that night. But after he told me he was glad that the choice he forced me into deprived me of ever being able to be a mother, that I can't forgive. I will never forgive myself for the abortion and I will never forgive him. The difference is he gets to move on and have a family, and I never will. I'm back home with my parents now and I have spoken to divorce lawyers too. They say a prenup doesn't mean anything anymore, but I'm not going to take anything away from him. I just want it to be over too. I read all your comments last night and this morning, and when I came back, I have been reading all of your messages all day, even if I haven't replied. I've been reading and digesting all of it. Some people have been really kind and told me I'm only human and made mistakes. These comments took place in private message. The image for fear on behalf of the commenter of being mocked. Some people took a harsher line and told me that I was completely to blame and a total fuck up, but that it's not too late and I can always turn it around. And some of you, Let's be honest, the sweeping majority of you have been awful, horrible, hate-filled pricks who have entirely too much invested in an internet stranger's marriage and extramarital affairs. You should all maybe look at your own lives and try to figure out why you feel the need to go online and tell bad people why they are bad people. That being said, every message has helped me. The cruel ones shook me to my core, and had they not been so brutal and so many, I could have maybe shrugged them off. But there are over 1,000 comments on this page, and there are probably less than 100 that aren't some variation of calling me a cunt or a whore or a monster. And even when I stopped replying, I kept reading. I have read every single word that every single one of you has typed. It shook my foundations and allowed cracks to appear that I've been chipping away at ever since. I read all last night. Slept 4 hours, read again, say my therapist, and read some more. The kind messages were a life ring. I needed those too. But again, if they had been the majority, I could have taken the easy road. I needed the breath of air every once in a while, but the poison cleaned me out, and the moderate messages kept me grounded between the extremes. I don't want to detail everything on here that my therapist and I talked about because this is already a rant and I'm not done yet. But 1 hour with a paid professional and 1,000 insults held a pretty inescapable mirror up to my face. Sam did absolutely nothing wrong. I would say I forgive him for the abortion, but there is nothing to forgive. That was the biggest realization I've had. I put him in an awful position and asked him to do something that probably would have driven him to suicide. I chose to have the abortion and mutilate my own body beyond repair. I alone chose that. I selfishly destroyed my marriage, twice, by cheating because fucking and forgetting being a grown-up was easier than being an adult and standing by the man I swore to love and expected such staggering loyalty from. I betrayed him in ways I, as a woman, am incapable of ever understanding, and I have to live with that, and my mutilated body forever, and I should live with that forever as a reminder. I want to express my genuine gratitude to each and every one of you, but there are 2 people I want to thank in particular. The first is the man or woman who messaged me about the authentic me about what I was truly asking of my husband and what it would have meant for him to push him to accept. I would have enslaved him. I don't remember your name. I'm sorry. There are so many messages. I hope you see this update. Thank you. Hit the like, share, and subscribe button for future updates.